All right. Hi, everybody. We're back. And this is time for another one of your questions about work. We got a fun guest today. For those who are joining us for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And today is day 141 of taking your questions. Steve Schlafman is a person who I've orbited around for a while, and this is our first chance to talk in a long time. And he's made this transition from having been a VC at some great firms whose names you will recognize. We met when he was at RRE, to now having a portfolio of activities centered around support for early stage founders. So a coaching practice, a repository of content at Founder Library that you can find, some assistance for co-founders to better get to know each other. And he's written several things that have caught our eyes, but one fairly recently that we saw was a post on a subject we talk about a lot here, which is how we manage time. And how we often look at our calendars and think, this is not what I wish to be doing with my time. I wish to be doing something else that's something I care about. And so, Steve, the question we'd love your perspective on is, how do you actually have your calendar match the things that you value?
Yeah, there's a quote that I love. It's actually a Tibetan saying, which is, if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. And as I've made this real significant career transition over the years, but I found myself when I was a traditional, an institutional investor, I would look at my schedule every day.
A mental health patient, but yes.
Well, I would look at my schedule every day, and it would be literally from 8 a.m. to in the night, back to back to back meetings. And I started to get frustrated. And I was like, I never feel like I have time to do things that are either creative or truly important to me. And all the things that I needed to do ended up just getting punted down the road. And so as a result, I was always context switching, or there was never a real rhythm to the days.
Right. You're a calendar taker versus a calendar maker.
Exactly. It was in a lot of ways very reactive, where there are just things flying at you and you're trying to very quickly assess, should I take this meeting? Should I spend my time doing this? And in meetings can be in external meetings, vendors, portfolio companies, founders that you want to meet, network. I mean, as you know, there's thousands of reasons you can meet someone.
I mean, look, we're blessed to get to do work like this for
100%.
And there's also a deluge of lots of things that one could do.
Yeah, and it was, honestly, it was like and when I went out on my own about 16 months ago, I realized that it was like a smattering of back-to-back coaching sessions, business pitching, networking meetings, and I just wasn't leveraging any of my time for creative work, and I wasn't blocking out large chunks of time for that deep focus work where you can actually start to really make progress on the things that are most important. It's I don't know if you're familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, but the upper left is what he calls the non-urgent important work, which is the stuff that you should be doing, but you because it's not urgent, you just punt on it. It's all the business planning, figuring out what you ultimately where you want to go. And oftentimes we're just dealing with fire drills and all the things that are flying
I know
at
it,
us.
By the way, from its oversimplification, probably in 7 Habits for Highly Effective People.
Yeah, exactly. And Stephen Covey wrote about that. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. He devotes a pretty significant chunk of
and
a
so
chapter
having diagnosed the problem in that way, what does one do? What did you do?
Well, I think the diagnosis is, and maybe I'm getting woo-woo. I'm a big, believer in meditation and mindfulness, and being able to understand how your body's reacting to situations. And after a while, every morning I would look at my calendar and be like, what the, part of my language, what the fuck am I doing?
You're not gonna send anybody here.
Yeah. I feel half of my day is spent where my energy is being robbed, as opposed to feeling like it's filling me up. And that was really the where I was I really want to spend more time writing and being thoughtful and research and going deep into coaching and building out tools and assessments and all these things, where if you're in meetings all day, you can't ever get that stuff done. And so really at first it was just tapping into my energy and my emotional state. And then for me, it was like, okay, well, what are the things that I need to start to figure out in order to like re-architect my days? And not just like, it's interesting. I know you have a big focus on future of work, but the reality is like, I think there's like, I don't want to like disrespect people that write about productivity, but I think there's like productivity porn, and where, it's like follow these 5 habits to be
we
more productive.
over-optimized for squeezing everything out of every last minute, as opposed
Exactly.
to not just enjoying, as opposed to doing what makes the most sense for us over the course of days, weeks, months, and years.
Exactly. And so for me, what I ultimately want to say is like, not like optimize my calendar so I can get more shit. Like I think that's a byproduct, but it's like, how do I actually architect my life that's like more aligned with my purpose and my values, the things I actually love to do. And so that like, if I'm spending the time doing the things that fill me up and that excite me, and I have like a full body yes to it, then I'm going to perform better. I'm going to be a lot happier. I'm not going to be as drained at the end of the day.
And so I think that one of the things that I see is a lot of people, it's rare to, by the way, diagnose this and have that self-awareness and mindfulness. And it's awesome. A lot of people do get to that point, though, where they're like, okay, I get that it's not aligned and I would like to align it. But then the actual how of doing it, like the trade craft of doing it, is where people get stuck. What did you find worked in, and what do you recommend to others in the trade craft of doing it?
Yeah. And I would say, like, I should say that, like, I don't have a magic bullet, and this is also taken.
What are some?
And well, three things quickly. I suffer from FOMO. I'm a people pleaser, and I have ADD. So that's like, honestly, you've
got the triad of
exactly
tendencies right there.
Exactly. So if I can do it, I think it's possible, but it certainly takes work. And so for me, I think that the first and foremost is figuring out, and I know this sounds like woo-woo, but it's even figuring out like what you value, right? It's what are the things that are most important to you. I think it is a really big one. And if any of you have read the blog post or read it, like, that to me is the foundation. And then it's, what's your purpose, right? Like, I think especially if you're in a role that's like highly reactive, where there are a lot of things flying at you, or even if you have like large blocks of time, but you don't necessarily know how to prioritize, like starting with what you value, what energizes you, what your purpose is. Like, I know it sounds it's a little cliche, but it's so true. And then the other thing that I recommend, and I've gone through this myself, is calendar audits. And I take my coaching partners, those that my clients, I take them through this process where we do like a full calendar audit. And we literally go back 3 to 6 months, and we look at like, what are these activities in these meetings, and do they fill you up? Like, do they energize you? Do they take energy away? Are they energy neutral? I always like to say, I tweeted this a few weeks ago, I think energy management is more important than time management.
Oh, I love that. So like a green, yellow, red kind of system.
100%.
Good, middle, or I'd never thought about it, about taking that principle of what gives you energy and mapping it to things. I love that. I mean, for me, what ended up working was just entering every week. And I think I noticed this on your calendar in your blog post, with pre-booked time. That is an appointment to do deep work. You use that phrase too. And I'm just curious, one other kind of tradecraft question about it is, there's some folks who might look at it and be like, look, here are two investor guys, they're like, both have many forms of privilege, two white men talking to each
100%.
other and saying like, hey, here's how we manage our calendars. And that a bunch of folks might be sitting there saying, easy for them to say, but what about for me in my situation where I'm either at the mercy of others who are trying to, or I'm at a different stage in my career. So how much of this for you is about the environment you're in kind of thing versus the choices you make, and any guidance for people who may feel less powerful to just decide how they want to spend their time, basically?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, the reality is we're all products of our environment, right? And in the context in which we find ourselves, and to me, like, I think there are going to be a number of meetings. Like I've worked in a number of organizations. Like there are certain meetings and responsibilities that you can't move, right? Like you're either in one-on-ones with your directs or vice versa. You have managers or you have to be in team meetings, but it's those other times. And the other thing that I really stress is that a lot of people just use calendars as a work tool, right? And so it's how do you begin to actually use it for a personal tool where it might be other areas where you have a little bit more control. And so for me, I actually block out personal stuff on my calendar. Like I put in my workouts. I put in when I meditate at 6:30 in the morning. That's because wild. It basically what I say is like our calendars are a 2D representation of like, or a 2D tapestry of like a 3D existence. And if we're not actually being mindful of the time outside of work, then, it's, so you always hear people of like, oh, I wish I could read a book, or I wish I could do this, or I wish, and it's like, well, if you don't actually block out the time or you make it a priority, and and so I think like, not just thinking about your calendar from the standpoint of work and like, and in the time, because the reality is you do have chunks of time to work, but it's also how do you use it outside of work as well.
I love that. I mean, I think that especially speaks to the parent in me who is like, well, you got to be even more intentional because it's not your time anymore. Yeah, for sure. It's my wife says, think like a we. Well, we definitely have a bunch of people with interest in this topic, and I really appreciate that not advice there. And for folks who have not been with us before, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is because neither Steve nor I knows how you should live your life. It's just we're sharing what our experiences are in the hopes that they are useful to you. Most advice is somebody trying to get you to live out their dream. And we will be back. We get our questions from you, from what we hear you asking us. Feel free to comment anywhere you find us, and to be continued. And Steve, I know I said this before we hit go live, but I just want to repeat it here so I really mean it, which is the kinds of things that you give people guidance on are really valuable. And so anytime you want to come back and pose another question,
I would love to.
Ask or answer. And we got, some friends watching. Jeff Slavatsky, I see, cheering us on. Good
man.
Yeah, right. Straight from the heartland. We are, just love to continue the conversation. So to be continued.
Thanks for having me, Roy.